Imagine this. You're at a party, you're talking to somebody you've just met, and you're having a good time, you're connecting. And then they ask you the dreaded question. So Anthony, what do you do? And then this response, right? Like, oh my God, what do I say? Should I brag about this? I sound so awkward. Oh my God. And then it takes all the self-control to not just lock yourself in the bathroom and hide there for the rest of the evening, right? Does that sound familiar at all? If it does, stay tuned because this video is for you. We're going to talk about how do you talk about yourself? How do we navigate around the imposter syndrome that flares up? How do we find the right balance of talking about ourselves and celebrating our accomplishments without feeling the like, oh my God, am I saying too much? Am I bragging too much? So today's episode of Satisfaction Seekers, we're going to be talking about yourself. Bit meta, right? My name is Anthony Kuo. I am your career satisfaction coach. And, I can tell you that over the years of working with people, one of the things that I see very commonly being the thief of career satisfaction is what we popularly call imposter syndrome. It makes it very, very difficult to talk about ourselves. And, before we talk about how to navigate it, we first have to understand why does it happen and how does it exist and how does it make things so difficult for us? And I think it's actually more useful to talk about something related before we talk to imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is the feeling of like, oh my God, they're going to find me out. I'm such a fraud. I don't belong here, right? And there's something related that happens before, which I call proximity syndrome. And that's when you have the experience of being too close to your own innate talents and skills that you don't see them, right? So it's kind of like seeing a fish breathing water. And if you imagine like being a human and saying to the fish, oh, well, Mr. Fish, it's so cool that you breathe water. I could never do that. Can you imagine saying that? The fish would probably look at you and be like, I don't know, bro. What's wrong with you that you can't? Like, where are your gills, right? Because for the fish, it's so obvious. It's not even a question. It just has gills, and that's how it is. And there's nothing special about that. And what's wrong with you that you breathe air, right? So think about that for a sec. And imagine, how many times have you gotten feedback for something where somebody told you that like, oh, hey, the way you do this is really cool. And you just kind of go, no big whoop, right? Now, when this happens, it's very, very easy to overlook your accomplishments, right? Because we're too close to them. We're too close to the skills and personal traits that make those things possible. And so we don't give ourselves credit for it. And when we're not giving ourselves credit for anything, it's hard to take the praise. It's also really hard to talk about ourselves without feeling like you have to like hide under a blanket, right? So in my experience, a big major chunk of what contributes to imposter syndrome is this proximity syndrome. I call it a close cousin to imposter syndrome because it's really a precursor, right? If you're not giving yourself credit, how do you take credit? Now, back to the idea of how do we introduce ourselves? How do we tell our story in a way that actually captures the power and impact that we actually have, whether you see it or not? One of the most common ways our stories lose power is through the loss and deletion of important details that get left out, not on purpose, but because we subconsciously delete it, because to us, it feels not important, right? This is the proximity syndrome happening. If you say, if we're not talking about a fish, we're talking about you. So think about something like breathing. Yeah, like unless you're being specifically cued to think about your breath in a yoga workshop or a meditation class or something, you're not talking about your breath. So, somebody asking you, so what do? You're not going to say, oh yeah, I breathe. And then I do this. Again, unless you're a breathwork practitioner. So the things that you do that are so innate to who you are usually the parts of you that are strongest, that are the parts of you that you most enjoy engaging and working with. And to you, it feels like air. Not only is it so natural, but it's also essential to your career satisfaction, which makes it that much more important for you to voice it, right? So, how unfortunate is it then that we end up deleting it because it's so second nature to us? Because then it makes it difficult for anybody else to pay attention to what is so powerful in us and so satisfying for us. I call this having a hidden superpower. It's a hidden superpower because it's hidden. We have it, and it's hidden from view. And the antidote to this is, well, to shine a light on it to the best of our abilities through something called a power story, which is a story, a specific story about an accomplishment where you're proud of what you did, whether or not it got recognition. So, coming back to this question of what do you do? A natural question at this point in the conversation is, well, how do I answer that? And how do I answer that in a way that feels good to me? And how do I answer that in a way that feels good to the person that I'm speaking to, right? Because, and I talk about this a lot in the other places that I teach about power stories, in the workshop, in my mentorship program, and in the Satisfaction Seekers newsletter. One of the hallmarks of a power story is that it feels good to listen to and it feels good to tell. And it creates this sort of leaning in where the person listening is like, ooh, I want to hear more. Or, ooh, I want that for me, right? But how do you come up with these stories? How do you find them in yourself? And you might be wondering to yourself, do I even have a power story? So let me share you 3 very simple questions that I use in myself and with my clients to help identify power stories, and then you can fold it into answering that question. So what do you do? The first question is, what do you do? And just start with, your job title. So, you might say, I sell rice, or I am a marine biologist, or I am a data and analytics professional. And then you're going to ask yourself these 3 very important questions. First one is, what do you like about it? What are you proud of? Specifically, what is something that you are proud of, regardless of whether somebody actually recognized you for that? Bonus points if you did get some nice feedback. Second question is, how so? So you did that, how so? And you ask it a couple times, and that question helps us get specifics. And the third question is, so what? You did that, you used these skills, so what? And that helps us to understand the impact of your work. So an example of this, I had someone in my group who, in response to the question, so what do you do? She would say, well, I work in merchandising for a major company. They sell stuff online, and I am responsible for making sure their stuff in retail stores is how it's supposed to be, which is a fine response, but it doesn't necessarily count as a power story because it doesn't necessarily talk to the skills that are involved. It doesn't talk about the accomplishment. It doesn't create or generate that feeling of like, ooh, let's lean in and connect more, right? So how do we work with that? We ask these questions. So how so, right? Or actually, what are you proud of? So I asked her, what are you proud of? And she says, well, I'm really proud of the way that I'm able to like organize it, because I visit a lot of stores, and I'm really proud of the relationships that I've created with the store managers. Oh, interesting. How so? Right? So we get to the specifics. And she says, well, I am responsible for like almost 100 stores in my region, and I have a schedule where I visit them. And each of these stores has a store manager, and it has displays that I need to make sure are properly stocked, they're working properly. I need to order parts, I need to order this and that, and I need to make sure it's clean. I need to make sure that any customers that are in the area have their questions answered and everyone is well trained and everything is working. Oh my goodness, wow, how so, right? And then we can talk about the organizational skill it takes, the inventory management skill it takes, the relationship building skill it takes, the bilingual skill it takes, which was part of how she was accomplishing this. Right, so do you see already how just getting to a couple layers of how so is so much more engaging and so much more impressive sounding and so much more true to what is actually happening than this abstraction of, well, I work in merchandising for this major retailer, right? Now the next question, so what? So you did all of this, so what? This is where it gets to the impact, right? Why does it matter that this happens? And specifically about this, what we want to focus in on is the part where it feels good, the parts that we're proud of. So something that she was really proud of was the relationship she had with the store managers, who are often, they're very busy and they're often working with many vendors and don't necessarily have the time of day to build relationships. So how is it important that this person was able to build those relationships? Well, it's important because it helped her do her job well. It helped get more merchandise into the stores. It helped to facilitate the customer experience, where they got to have a good experience and buy more stuff. And it was probably responsible for quite a bit more revenue for both the stores as well as for the company that had its product in the stores. So again, notice the difference of how that gets told. And you can start to correlate that to how you might answer, what do you do? Right? Now, you don't need to say the full-on elevator pitch, but you might start to include some of these elements of what specifically did you do and what elements of your skill did you feel really good about using, that you actually felt proud of using. Because when you're proud of something, it starts to come through when you talk about it. And you don't need to manufacture the pride, right? So, just to recap here, the 3 questions that help you identify a power story in yourself is just, first of all, what are you proud of? Or another way to think about this is, what do you received positive feedback for that you kind of felt like, no big deal, right? Because that can point to the presence of a hidden superpower where others can see it, right? Then you ask, how so? What did you do? What skills did you use? How did that happen? And then you ask about the impact. So what? Why did it matter? How did it make somebody's life easier? Now, something that can happen here is that these questions do help, and they will almost certainly help you with developing a stronger narrative that you can boil down into, 1 or 2 sentence summary the next time somebody asks you what you do. And sometimes it can still be difficult to answer, right? Because your hidden superpowers are, by their very definition, hidden from view. And so here's where it starts to be really useful for some external sounding boards, some external reflection, some external feedback. And you can get this from a friend or a colleague, or people who are in a community where, people know what to ask and reflect. Or you can even ask the people who gave you the feedback, the positive feedback, to tell you more. You can ask them the questions, how so, and so what. And one of my favorite things about the Create a Career You Love mentorship community is when members share their observations of each other's superpowers. They give each other feedback, they observe things in each other, and then we get to have this really wonderful interaction where somebody's feeling seen and validated for something that is true and really important way of them expressing themselves, but they didn't pay very much attention to before because it's too close to them. And I've been on the receiving end of that. And it is, let me tell you, it is always touching and it's always validating and it's always nice to be seen. And specifically to be seen for a resourceful, strong part of who I am. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, it's a pretty important part of what we do in the community. Link for that is below. And if you'd like to be in on the Satisfaction Seekers newsletter, where you can learn more about how to build more career satisfaction for yourself, and share some more tips and stories and case studies and resources, totally free. Link for that is also below. And for now, and to carry over into the next time somebody asks you what you do, I'd like you to just leave you with this thought that you have impact, even if you can't see it. In fact, the fact that you can't see it might be a good indicator that you are doing something really powerful. And the trick is to find spots where you do have impact and give yourself credit there. So you can use these questions to guide your exploration there. You can also rely on others to help reflect. And once you do, then you can start taking credit for what you do. And then you can start talking about it. So thanks for watching. And here's to your career satisfaction. I'll see you next time.